Clara Whitmore's hands were shaking so hard, the telegraph key slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. She didn't bend down to pick it up. She couldn't. Bending meant pain. Pain meant remembering. And remembering meant admitting that 21 days ago something happened in this town that broke her, and every single person in Silver Creek, Colorado, chose to look the other way. She gripped the edge of her desk and whispered to herself the only words keeping her alive. "Don't sit down. Whatever you do, don't sit down." Before we continue Clara's story, I want to ask you something. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever carried pain that nobody believed was real, this story was written for you. Subscribe to this channel, follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. Now let me tell you what happened the morning everything changed. The telegraph key lay on the wooden floor for 11 seconds before Clara forced herself to move. She didn't bend at the waist. She lowered herself slowly, one hand gripping the desk, the other pressed flat against her ribs, and she went down on one knee like a woman twice her age. Her fingers closed around the brass key. She stood back up, and the effort nearly made her cry. But Clara Whitmore had not cried in 21 days. Not once. Not when the bruises turned black. Not when the doctor looked at her injuries and said, "You should be more careful walking at night, Miss Whitmore." Not when the sheriff visited her office the next morning, leaned against the doorframe, and asked her with a voice as casual as if he were ordering coffee, whether she was sure she wanted to make trouble. She had stopped crying because crying required someone to hear you. And in Silver Creek, Colorado, in the summer of 1883, nobody was listening. The morning sun came through the telegraph office window and landed on Clara's desk like a lie, warm and golden and full of promise, as if the world outside hadn't decided she didn't matter. She placed the key back on the desk, straightened her posture, smoothed the front of her dress with both hands, even though the fabric was already pressed and clean. Clara was always clean, always composed, always standing. Standing was the only thing she had left. Because sitting sent a fire through her lower back and her ribs that made her vision blur. The pain was sharp and deep, and it lived in places she couldn't show anyone. Places that reminded her every single second that what happened to her was real, even if the whole town had agreed it wasn't. The door to the telegraph office opened at 7:14 that morning. The first customer was Henry Dawson, a wheat farmer from the South Valley. He needed to send a message to his brother in Kansas City about a seed shipment. "Morning, Miss Whitmore," Henry said. He placed his written message on the desk. He did not look at her face. "Morning, Mr. Dawson," Clara said. Her voice was steady, professional, the voice of a woman who had mastered the art of pretending. She picked up his note and began tapping the message into the telegraph. Her fingers moved faster than any operator in the territory. People said Clara Whitmore could send 60 words a minute. Men who had worked the telegraph lines for 20 years couldn't match her speed. Henry stood in silence while she worked. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the floor. He looked everywhere except at Clara. When she finished, she said, "That'll be 35 cents, Mr. Dawson." He placed the coins on the desk without touching her hand. Then he turned toward the door and stopped. His back was to her. His hand was on the door handle. And for one brief, fragile moment, Clara thought he might say something. Might acknowledge the bruise still fading along her jawline. Might ask if she was all right. Might do what any decent human being should have done 3 weeks ago. Henry Dawson opened the door and walked out without another word. Clara exhaled. This was her life now. Performing normalcy for people who needed her to be normal so they wouldn't have to feel guilty. The second customer came at 8:02. Martha Greenfield, the wife of the general store owner. She needed to send a birthday greeting to her daughter in Denver. Martha was different from Henry. Martha talked. "You look tired, dear," Martha said, leaning against the counter with the casual authority of a woman who believed small talk was a form of charity. "You should rest more. A young woman like you needs her sleep." Clara's jaw tightened. Rest. As if the reason she looked exhausted was a lack of sleep, and not the fact that she hadn't been able to lie flat in her own bed for 21 days. "I'm fine, Mrs. Greenfield," Clara said. "You know," Martha continued, lowering her voice to that particular pitch women used when they were about to say something cruel while pretending to be kind. "People talk, Clara. And I think the best thing you could do for yourself is just move forward. Put the past behind you. Whatever happened, and I'm not saying anything happened well, dwelling on it won't help." Clara's hands stopped moving on the telegraph key. She looked at Martha Greenfield, really looked at her, and she saw it, the thing she had seen in every face in Silver Creek for 3 weeks. Not ignorance, not confusion, not even indifference. Fear. Martha Greenfield knew exactly what had happened to Clara. She knew who did it. She knew the night, the place, the details that had spread through the town like wildfire before being stomped out by the Baxter family's money and influence. Martha knew. And Martha was afraid. 30 cents, Clara said quietly. Martha placed the coins down, patted Clara's hand once, a gesture so condescending it burned worse than the bruises, and left. Clara stood alone in her office. The clock on the wall ticked. The sun moved across the floor. And Clara Whitmore thought for perhaps the 100th time about closing the office, packing a bag, and disappearing. Taking a stagecoach east. Leaving Silver Creek behind. Starting over in a city where nobody knew her name, and nobody knew what had happened, and nobody would look through her the way this town looked through her every single day. But leaving meant Colton Baxter won. And Clara, broken, exhausted, standing because she physically could not sit, refused to let him win. She didn't know where that stubbornness came from. Her mother had been a quiet woman. Her father had died when she was 12. She had no siblings, no husband, no family left in Silver Creek. She was alone in every possible way a person could be alone. But something inside her, something small and furious and barely alive, kept whispering, "Stay. Stand. Don't let them erase you." So she stayed. She stood. And she waited for something she couldn't name. The afternoon passed slowly. 3 more customers came and went. Each one performed the same ritual, polite words, averted eyes, the careful dance of pretending Clara Whitmore was just fine. At 4:47 in the afternoon, the door opened one more time. Clara looked up, and the man standing in the doorway was no one she had ever seen before. How was tall. Not broad in the way. Colton Baxter was broad, thick, and loud, and taking up space as a declaration of ownership. This man was tall, the way a pine tree is tall, straight and still, and rooted in something deep. He wore a hat pulled low, trail dust on his coat, and boots that had walked more miles than most men in Silver Creek had ridden. His face was wind-burned and quiet. His eyes moved slowly, the way a person's eyes move when they have spent years reading landscapes instead of people. He stepped inside. "Ma'am," he said. One word, low voice. No smile, but nothing cold about it either. "Can I help you?" Clara asked. "Need to send a message," the man said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Land office in Denver. Boundary dispute on my ranch." Clara took the paper. Their fingers didn't touch. He had placed it on the desk, the way you set something down when you're used to handling fragile things carefully. She unfolded it and read the message. It was short and direct. No wasted words. She glanced up at him. "Your name, Ethan Callahan. Address, North Fork up past the timberline. No road. Just follow the creek about 14 miles and turn east at the dead spruce." Clara almost smiled. Almost. It was the most specific and simultaneously unhelpful address she had ever recorded. She began tapping the message. Her fingers moved fast, the brass key clicking in the quiet office. Ethan Callahan did not shift his weight. He did not look at the ceiling or the floor. He did not perform the ritual of avoidance that every other person in Silver Creek had perfected. He watched her. Not in the way men usually watched her, not the appraising look, not the dismissive glance, not the guilty sideways peek. He watched her the way a man watches an animal that's injured but still moving. With attention. With recognition. Clara felt it before she understood it. A prickling at the back of her neck. A tightening in her chest that wasn't pain. It was something worse. It was being seen. She finished the message. Set the key down. $1.20, she said. Ethan placed the money on the desk. Exact change. He folded the receipt she handed him and put it in his coat pocket. Then he didn't leave. He stood there for a moment, looking at her with those quiet, wind-burned eyes. "How long?" he said. Clara blinked. "Pardon. How long you been standing like that?" Her blood went cold. No one had asked her that. Not the doctor, not the sheriff, not Martha Greenfield with her condescending hand pats. Not a single person in 21 days had acknowledged the simple, visible, obvious fact that Clara Whitmore was a woman in pain. "I don't know what you mean," Clara said. Her voice was perfect, calm and professional and absolutely steady. Ethan didn't push. He nodded once. Slow. Like he was filing her answer away alongside all the things she hadn't said. "You've been hurting for a long time," he said. Not a question, a statement. Said the way a man says something he's certain about, the way you'd say, "It's going to rain," when you've watched the clouds build for hours. Clara's hands went still on the desk. Her composure, the composure she had maintained for 21 days through every averted gaze and every whispered lie, and every morning she forced herself upright when her body begged her to collapse, cracked. Not visibly, not in a way anyone watching would notice, but inside, something shifted. Like a wall that had held back a river developing its first thin fracture. "I'm fine," she whispered. Ethan Callahan looked at her for one more second. Then he tipped his hat. "Ma'am," he said, and he walked out. Clara stood behind her desk in the empty telegraph office. The clock ticked. The sun dropped lower. Shadows crept across the floor like secrets. And for the first time in 21 days, Clara Whitmore pressed both hands flat against the desk and let her shoulders drop. Not crying, not breaking, just releasing. Because someone had seen her, and that terrified her more than anything Colton Baxter had ever done. She closed the office at 6 o'clock, locked the front door with a key she kept on a string around her neck, because she no longer trusted leaving it under the mat. No longer trusted that locked doors meant safety. No longer trusted any of the small certainties that used to hold her life together. She walked home the long way, not down Main Street where people might see her, not past the Baxter Ranch where the white fences gleamed in the evening light like the teeth of something predatory. She took the back path along the creek. The water was low, it had been a dry summer, and the rocks along the bank were smooth and pale in the fading light. Her boarding house was a small 2-room building behind the church. She rented it from Pastor Williams, who charged her $3 a month and never once asked why she had started leaving a chair wedged under her door handle at night. She climbed the steps carefully, unlocked the door, stepped inside, and immediately knew something was wrong. Her things had been moved. Not obviously, not the way a burglar would toss a room. Subtly. The kind of rearrangement that was designed to send a message rather than steal anything. Her hairbrush was on the left side of her dresser instead of the right. Her writing paper had been shuffled. The small photograph of her parents, the only one she had, was turned face down. Clara stood in the doorway and felt the air leave her lungs. This had happened before. 3 times in the past 21 days, someone had entered her room while she was at work and moved her things. Never took anything. Never broke anything. Just shifted objects slightly, like a hand reaching into her private life and stirring it. The message was simple and devastating. We can reach you whenever we want. There is no place that is yours alone. You are not safe, and you never will be, as long as you stay in Silver Creek. Clara walked to the dresser, picked up her parents' photograph, turned it face up. She looked at her mother's face in the faded image. Her mother had been a schoolteacher, a gentle woman. A woman who believed that goodness would always be rewarded if you just waited long enough. "Mama," Clara whispered, "I've been waiting, and nobody's coming." She set the photograph down. She did not cry. She wedged the chair under the door handle, checked the window latch, lay down on the floor beside her bed, not on it because the mattress was too soft and pressed against her bruised ribs in ways that made breathing difficult, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep did not come for hours. When it finally did, it brought dreams she would not describe to anyone. The next morning, Clara opened the telegraph office at exactly 7 o'clock, like she did every morning. She stood behind her desk. She placed her hands flat on the wood. She arranged her face into the expression she had perfected over 21 days. Calm, professional, untouchable. And at 7:22, Ethan Callahan walked through the door again. He carried a tin cup of coffee. He set it on the far edge of her desk, not close enough to invade her space, but close enough that the gesture was unmistakable. "Didn't know how you take it," he said. "Black's all I had." Clara stared at the cup. People brought her telegrams. People brought her money. People brought her their problems, and their messages, and their carefully constructed ignorance. Nobody brought her coffee. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know." He stood on the other side of the counter. Same position as yesterday. Same quiet stance. Same eyes that moved slowly and missed nothing. "Mr. Callahan." "Ethan." "Mr. Callahan," she repeated because using his first name felt dangerous. "Why are you still in Silver Creek? Your message went out yesterday. You should have your reply from Denver within a few days. There's nothing keeping you here." Ethan looked at her. "I reckon there is," he said. Clara's chest tightened. "I don't need your help." "Didn't offer any." "Then what are you doing here?" "Drinking coffee with someone who looks like she could use a cup." Clara opened her mouth to argue, to tell him that she was fine, that she didn't need a stranger's pity, that whatever he thought he saw yesterday was nothing. Just tiredness, just stress, just the ordinary wear of running a business alone. But the words didn't come, because Ethan Callahan wasn't looking at her with pity. He wasn't looking at her the way the townspeople looked at her with guilt wrapped in indifference. He wasn't looking through her. He was just looking at her, like she was a person, like she was real. Clara picked up the tin cup. The coffee was lukewarm and bitter, and the best thing she had tasted in 3 weeks. She didn't say thank you. She couldn't. If she opened that door, the door of gratitude, of vulnerability, of acknowledging that this small kindness had reached something inside her, that 21 days of silence had nearly killed, she might not be able to close it again. So she drank the coffee. And Ethan stood there quiet and patient, like a man who understood that some things take time. After a few minutes he said, "Noticed your desk drawer sticks." Clara blinked. "What?" "Your right-hand drawer, the wood's swollen. Humidity probably. I could plane it down for you if you've got a tool shed nearby." "You don't have to. Takes 10 minutes. You got a shed or not?" Clara pointed toward the back of this building without thinking. "Behind the office. But it's not my shed it belongs to. I'll find it." He walked out through the back door. Clara stood behind her desk, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee, listening to the sound of a stranger rummaging through a tool shed to fix a drawer she hadn't asked him to fix. And for the first time in 21 days, the tight burning knot in her chest loosened just slightly. Just enough that she could take a full breath without her ribs screaming. It wasn't hope. She wasn't ready for hope. Hope required believing that something could change, and Clara had spent 3 weeks learning that nothing in Silver Creek ever changed. But it was something. A crack in the wall, a fracture in the silence. Ethan came back inside carrying a hand plane and a block of sandpaper. He knelt beside her desk, pulled the drawer out, and began working on the wood. The sound of the plane was rhythmic and steady, scraping, smoothing, scraping again. He didn't talk while he worked. Clara watched him from behind the desk, her hands wrapped around the tin cup. After 7 or 8 minutes, Ethan slid the drawer back in. It moved smoothly without resistance. He stood up, brushed wood shavings off his knees, and put the tools on the counter. "There you go," he said. "Thank you," Clara said. The words came out before she could stop them. Ethan nodded. He picked up his hat from the counter and put it on. "I'll be around town today," he said. "Got some business at the land office." He turned toward the door. "Mr. Callahan." He stopped. "The Baxter family," Clara said. Her voice had dropped. Quiet. Careful. Like a woman testing thin ice. "They own most of the land around here. Whatever your boundary dispute is, it probably involves them." Ethan turned back to face her. "That's so. They don't like people who ask questions." I've noticed. I'm serious. They're not just wealthy ranchers playing politics. They control this town. The sheriff answers to them. The bank answers to them. Even the... She stopped herself, pressed her lips together. She had already said too much. Ethan studied her face. Even the doctor, he finished. Clara said nothing. Ma'am, I've spent 15 years living in mountains where the weather can kill you faster than a bullet. I've tracked wolves in snow so deep it came up to my chest. I've pulled myself out of a river so cold my hands stopped working for 2 days. He paused. I ain't afraid of a rich man with a sheriff in his pocket. You should be, Clara said. Everyone else is. Ethan looked at her, quiet, steady. And then he said something that Clara would remember for the rest of her life. That's the difference, Miss Whitmore. I ain't everyone else. He tipped his hat and walked out. Clara stood in the empty office. The coffee was gone. The drawer worked perfectly. The clock ticked on the wall. And somewhere deep inside the place where she had buried every emotion for 21 days, a voice whispered. Maybe somebody finally came. She pushed the thought away immediately. Pushed it down hard the way you stomp on an ember before it becomes a fire. Because in Silver Creek hope was the most dangerous thing a woman could feel. The door opened 20 minutes later, and this time it was someone she dreaded seeing. Colton Baxter. He walked in the way he always walked, shoulders wide, boots loud, the smile of a man who believed the world was a gift specifically designed for him. 28 years old, blonde hair, clean clothes. The kind of man women in Denver might call handsome if they didn't know what lived behind his blue eyes. Clara, he said, not Miss Whitmore, never Miss Whitmore. He had stopped using her formal name months ago, around the same time he had stopped asking before he touched things that didn't belong to him. Mr. Baxter. Clara's voice was ice. Her hands were steady on the desk, but beneath it, her knees trembled. Heard there's a stranger in town, Colton said. He leaned against the counter, casual proprietary. Big fella, mountain type. Came in here yesterday. Clara said nothing. What did he want? He sent a telegraph. That's what people do in a telegraph office. Colton's smile didn't change, but his eyes did. Something in them shifted the way a snake shifts before it strikes. Not fast, deliberate. You know, he said slowly. My father's been real generous with you, Clara. Letting you keep this office open, letting you stay in town. Not everyone gets that kind of generosity. I don't need your father's permission to run my business. Sure you do. He said it so simply, so casually, as if he were stating the weather. Everyone does. That's how Silver Creek works. You know that. He straightened up, adjusted his hat, looked around the office with the bored appraisal of a man surveying something he already owned. If the stranger comes back, Colton said, you tell him this ain't the kind of town that welcomes outsiders. He walked to the door, stopped, turned back. And Clara. She looked at him. Her face was stone. You look tired. You should rest more. He smiled. Wouldn't want anything else to happen to you. He walked out. Clara's knees gave way. She caught herself on the desk. Both hands, flat arms, locked her body, shaking with a fury and a terror so intertwined she couldn't tell them apart. Wouldn't want anything else to happen to you. 21 days ago he had said something similar, standing over her, in the dark. While Clara shut the memory down, sealed it, buried it under the same wall she had been building since that night. But the wall was cracking. Ethan Callahan had put a fracture in it with a cup of coffee and a fixed drawer, and Colton Baxter was pounding against it from the other side with the weight of everything he had done. Clara stood in her office and felt the two forces pressing against each other, and for the first time she realized this could not hold. Something was going to break. The question was what and who would be standing when it did. She worked through the rest of the day in silence. Sent messages. Received messages. Performed the motions of a functional human being. At 6 o'clock she locked the door. She walked home the long way. She checked her room. Nothing had been moved today. She lay on the floor beside her bed. She stared at the ceiling. And in the darkness, she whispered 3 words she hadn't spoken since she was a child. Please help me. She didn't know who she was asking. God. Her dead mother. The universe. The stranger with the quiet eyes and the tin cup of coffee. It didn't matter. Because 4 miles up the mountain, sitting on the porch of a borrowed cabin with a fire at his feet and the stars above his head, Ethan Callahan was staring at the lights of Silver Creek below. He had been in town for one day. He had come for a land dispute. But he had found something else entirely. He had found a town that was sick. Sick with silence. Sick with fear. Sick with the particular kind of cowardice that allows good people to watch bad things happen and do nothing. And he had found a woman standing behind a desk with trembling hands and a bruise on her jaw, and eyes that burned with something most people would have lost a long time ago. Fight. Clara Whitmore still had fight in her. She just didn't know it yet. Ethan took a long drink of water, set the cup down, pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders. He had planned to stay one day. One day turned into 2. He wasn't leaving. Not because he was noble. Not because he was brave, not because he saw himself as any kind of hero, but because Ethan Callahan had learned one thing in 15 years of living alone in the mountains. When you see something true, truly true, and you walk away from it, you lose the right to call yourself a man. And Clara Whitmore was the truest thing he had seen in a very long time. He didn't know what he was going to do. He didn't have a plan, but he was staying. And in Silver Creek, that was the most dangerous decision anyone had made in years. Ethan Callahan walked into the Silver Creek land office at 8 o'clock the next morning and found it locked. He knocked twice. No answer. He knocked a third time harder, and the door opened just enough to reveal the face of a thin, nervous man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. "We're closed," the man said. "Sign says you open at 8. "We're closed today." "Why?" The man's eyes darted left then right, as if the street itself might be listening. "Inventory. Records audit. Come back next week." Ethan put his hand flat against the door, not pushing, just holding it open. "I sent a telegraph to Denver 2 days ago about a boundary dispute on my ranch. North Fork up past the timberline. I need to see the original survey maps." "I can't help you with that right now." "Can't or won't." The man swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed like a fishing cork. "Mr. Callahan, I'm going to ask you nicely to come back another time." "How do you know my name?" Silence. Ethan hadn't told anyone in Silver Creek his name, except Clara Whitmore. He'd given it at the telegraph office. That was it. 2 days in town, and the land office clerk already knew who he was. "Someone told you I was coming," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. The clerk's face went white. "Please leave." "Who told you?" "Mr. Callahan." "Was it Baxter?" The door slammed shut. Ethan heard the lock turn. He heard the clerk's footsteps retreating fast like a rabbit bolting for its hole. Ethan stood on the porch of the land office and looked down Main Street. Silver Creek was awake now. Horses tied to posts. A wagon rolling past the general store. 2 women walking with parasols toward the church. An ordinary morning in an ordinary western town. Except nothing about this town was ordinary. He walked to the general store. He needed provisions, coffee, salt, jerky, a new coil of rope. Simple things. The kind of purchases a man makes when he plans to stay longer than expected. The store was run by a heavy-set man named Greenfield. His wife Martha was behind the counter arranging fabric bolts when Ethan walked in. She looked up. Her smile was automatic and hollow, the way a person smiles when they've been caught doing nothing wrong but feel guilty anyway. "Morning," Ethan said. "Need a few things." "Help yourself," Martha said. Her voice was bright and brittle. Ethan moved through the store picking up what he needed. He set the items on the counter. Martha began tallying them on a scrap of paper. "You're the fella from up the mountain," she said. "That's right." "Staying long?" "Depends." "On what?" "On how long it takes to get an honest answer in this town." Martha's pencil stopped moving. She looked up at him, and for a moment the brittle smile cracked, and something real showed through something tired and frightened and old. "Mr. Callahan," she said quietly, "some advice, free of charge. Don't go asking questions that don't concern you." Everything concerns me when a land office won't let me see my own survey maps. Martha leaned forward. That's not what I'm talking about, and you know it. Ethan met her eyes. Then what are you talking about, Mrs. Greenfield? She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked away, picked up the pencil, and finished the tally. $3.40, she said. Her voice was bright and brittle again. The moment was gone. Ethan paid. He gathered his supplies. At the door he stopped. Your husband, he said. He around? He's out. Deliveries. Tell him I'd like to talk about property lines north of town. I hear the Baxters have been moving fences on land that ain't theirs. Martha's face drained of color so fast, Ethan thought she might faint. Don't say that name in my store, she whispered. Why not? It's just a name. Nothing about that name is just anything. Martha's hands were shaking now. She pressed them flat on the counter to stop the trembling, and the gesture hands flat, body rigid, forcing control hit Ethan like a fist to the chest. He had seen that exact gesture yesterday. Behind a telegraph desk. From a woman with a bruise on her jaw and pain in her back. Clara pressed her hands flat. Martha pressed her hands flat. The same gesture. The same fear. Different women, same cause. Ethan walked out of the store with his supplies and a cold knot forming in his stomach. He had come to Silver Creek for a land dispute, a boundary line, a simple legal matter that should have taken a day to resolve. But boundaries in Silver Creek weren't about land. They were about power. And one family had decided where every line was drawn. He found Clara's telegraph office open at 9. She was behind her desk, standing as always, her hands busy with the key. She didn't look up when he walked in. Morning, he said. Morning, Mr. Callahan. Ethan? Mr. Callahan. She still wouldn't use his first name. He noticed she was wearing a dress with a higher collar than yesterday, covering more of her neck. The bruise on her jaw had faded slightly, but was still visible if you looked. Land office wouldn't see me today, Ethan said. Clerk knew my name before I gave it. Care to explain how that works? Clara's fingers paused on the key. News travels fast in small towns. News travels fast when someone's pushing it. She looked up. Her eyes were sharp. What are you implying? I ain't implying anything. I'm saying Walter Baxter told the land clerk to shut his door before I could see survey maps that probably show his fences are sitting on land that don't belong to him. Clara set the telegraph key down carefully. Lower your voice. Why? Because the walls in this town have ears, and those ears belong to people who will repeat every word you just said to the Baxter Ranch before sundown. Ethan leaned against the counter. Good, let them. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Then tell me. Clara closed her eyes. When she opened them, something in her face had shifted. Not softened, hardened. Like a woman making a decision she knew she'd regret. Close the door, she said. Ethan walked to the front door and shut it. He turned the sign from open to closed. When he turned back, Clara had moved from behind the desk and was standing near the back wall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Sit down, she said. You ain't sitting. I'm not going to sit. Ethan looked at her. She looked at him. Neither moved. Walter Baxter came to Silver Creek in 1871. Clara said. Her voice was low and flat, like a woman reciting facts she had memorized the way you memorize a prayer through repetition and desperation. He bought the Baxter Ranch with money nobody asked about. Within 2 years, he owned the bank. Within 5, he owned the sheriff. Within 8, he owned everything. How? The same way men like him always do. He bought what he could. He threatened what he couldn't buy. And what he couldn't buy or threaten, he destroyed. The farmers. Clara nodded. Tom Anderson's family had a homestead north of town for 12 years. One morning, a man from the county showed up with papers saying the land had been resurveyed and half of it belonged to the Baxter Ranch. Tom fought it. Went to the land office, filed a dispute. What happened? His barn burned down 2 weeks later. No investigation, no questions. Tom sold what was left for pennies and moved his family to Wyoming. Ethan's jaw tightened. Who else? The Millers, the the Crawfords, James Whitaker. He ran the blacksmith shop until he spoke against Walter at a town council meeting. His shop was condemned the next day. Building violations, they said. He left town within a month. And the sheriff just watched. The sheriff does more than watch. He participates. Frank Dawson is Walter's man, has been for years. He doesn't enforce the law. He enforces Walter's will. Frank Dawson, Ethan said. Any relation to Henry Dawson, wheat farmer, came in here yesterday. Clara's expression flickered. Henry is Frank's brother. The sheriff's brother is a farmer who can barely look a woman in the eye. Henry is ashamed of what his brother has become, but he's too afraid to say it out loud, so he looks at his boots and sends telegraphs and pretends nothing is happening, like everyone else. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "And what happened to you?" Clara's arms tightened across her chest. "I told you, I'm fine." "No, ma'am, you ain't fine. You haven't sat down since I walked in here 2 days ago. You flinch every time the door opens. Someone's been in your room moving your things, letting you know they can get to you anytime they want." Clara's face went white. "How do you know about my room?" "Because I've been watching your boarding house since last night." The silence was absolute. "You've been what?" Clara whispered. "I sat up on the ridge behind the church, had a clear line of sight to your building. Around 10 o'clock, someone came down the alley, tried your door. It was locked, so they moved on. But they'll be back." Clara's hands were trembling. She pressed them against her sides. "You had no right to." "You're right, I didn't. But I did it anyway because something bad happened to you and the people in this town are either too scared or too bought to do anything about it. And I ain't either of those things." Clara turned away from him. She faced the wall. Her shoulders were rigid, her breathing shallow. "It was Colton," she said. The name fell into the room like a stone into a well. "Walter's son," Ethan said. 21 days ago." Clara's voice was barely audible. "He came to the office after hours. I was closing up. He'd been drinking. He'd been coming around for weeks before that. Saying things, making comments. I told him to stop. I told him I wasn't interested. I told him no." She stopped. The clock ticked. "He didn't listen," she said. Ethan didn't move. Didn't speak. He stood perfectly still the way a man stands when he knows that any movement, any sound, might break something fragile and irreplaceable. "I went to the doctor the next morning," Clara continued. "Dr. Harlan. He examined me. He saw everything, the bruises, the everything, and he wrote in his report that I had fallen down the stairs." He lied. He protected himself. Walter Baxter pays for Dr. Harlan's office, pays his rent, pays for his equipment. If Harlan tells the truth, he loses everything. And the sheriff. Frank came to see me the day after. He sat right where you're standing and told me he was sorry to hear about my accident. He said I should be more careful. He said Silver Creek was a safe town and he'd hate for anything else to happen to me. He threatened you. He warned me. There's a difference in Silver Creek. A threat is when they tell you what they'll do. A warning is when they tell you what will happen if you don't stay quiet. Ethan's hands were fists at his sides. Not from anger, or not only from anger. From the cold, precise recognition of a system designed to crush one woman so completely that she would disappear without anyone having to say the word. "Who else knows?" he asked. "Everyone." Everyone. "Mr. Callahan, this is a town of 400 people. Everyone saw Colton walking toward my office that night. Everyone heard what happened. Martha Greenfield's husband was across the street and turned around and walked home. Henry Dawson was at the saloon and heard sounds and ordered another drink." Her voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly, just enough. 400 people, she said. And not one of them came. Ethan was quiet for a very long time. Clara kept her back to him. The clock kept ticking. Then Ethan said, "I'm going to ask you something and I need you to think careful before you answer." Clara turned her head slightly, not fully facing him. Just enough. "Do you want this to stay buried? Because if you do, I'll respect that. I'll fix my land dispute and go back up the mountain, and you'll never see me again." Clara waited. "But if you want somebody to fight for you, not because you can't fight because I think you can, but because you shouldn't have to do it alone, then I need you to say so, out loud. Because I ain't gonna decide that for you. Clara turned fully around. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set and her hands were still. If I say yes, she said, Colton will come after you. I expect he will. Walter will use the sheriff. I expect that too. You could get hurt, or worse. Ma'am, I've had grizzlies try to kill me. I've fallen through river ice in January. I once rode 30 miles in a blizzard with a broken collarbone because my horse spooked and I couldn't catch her. He paused. Ain't nothing in this town that scares me more than riding away and leaving you standing behind that desk, pretending you're fine when every person in Silver Creek knows you ain't. Clara's lower lip trembled once. She pressed her teeth together and stopped it. Why? She whispered. You don't know me. We met 2 days ago. Why would you risk everything for a stranger? Ethan looked at her the way he looked at the mountains, steady, patient, without pretense. Because 15 years ago, someone should have done this for my mother, he said, and nobody did. The words landed between them like something holy. Clara stared at him. Ethan's face was still and calm, but his eyes, those quiet, wind-burned eyes, held something she had never seen in any man in Silver Creek. Not pity, not anger, understanding. The understanding of someone who had watched the same kind of silence destroy someone he loved. Your mother, Clara said softly. Small town in Montana, different name, same story. Man with money, woman with nobody, town that looked away. He paused. She died thinking nobody cared. I was 12 years old and too small to do a damn thing about it. He straightened up. I ain't 12 anymore. Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Quick. Businesslike. Not a gesture of weakness, a gesture of decision. What do you need from me? She asked. The truth. All of it. Everything you remember, everything you know, everything you've heard. I need names, dates, and anything the Baxters don't want coming to light. That's dangerous. That's the point. Clara took a breath, let it out slowly. And then she began talking. She talked for 47 minutes. She told Ethan about the night it happened. The sounds, the words Colton said, the way the floorboards creaked the moment she realized no one was going to hear her. She told him about the morning after the walk to Dr. Harlan's office, the cold examination table, the way Harlan's hands shook when he wrote accidental fall in his report. She told him about the sheriff's visit, and the first time her room was entered, and the second time and the third. She told him about the other women. There had been others. A young schoolteacher named Sarah, who left Silver Creek 3 years ago without explanation. A ranch hand's daughter named Annie, who was sent to live with relatives in California after a misunderstanding. A widow named Mrs. Colby, whose boarding house was mysteriously condemned by the county inspector 2 weeks after she filed a complaint against Colton that the sheriff refused to record. A pattern. Clear and brutal and stretching back years. Ethan listened without interrupting. When Clara finished, the office was silent except for the ticking clock and the faint sound of horses outside. The doctor's report, Ethan said. The real one. Is there a chance he kept it? Clara blinked. What do you mean? You said Harlan's hands shook when he wrote the false report. A man whose hands shake is a man whose conscience ain't dead. Maybe he wrote 2 reports, the one he filed and the one he kept. Why would he keep evidence of his own lie? Because guilty men do strange things, Miss Whitmore. They destroy evidence when they're scared, but they preserve it when they're hoping someone will come along and give them permission to tell the truth. Clara stared at him. You think Dr. Harlan wants to talk? I think Dr. Harlan has been waiting for an excuse to talk for 21 days. He just needs someone to walk through his door who ain't connected to the Baxters. And that someone is you. That someone is me. Ethan moved toward the front door. He paused with his hand on the handle. One more thing. The land records I need for my boundary dispute, the ones the clerk won't show me. I'd bet my last dollar those records also show the Baxters have been filing false claims on homesteads across the North Valley. They have, Clara said. Tom Anderson wasn't the only one. There are at least 4 families I know of who lost land to paperwork that didn't exist until the Baxters needed it to. Then this ain't just about what happened to you. This is about the whole town. It's always been about the whole town. That's why nobody talks. If one thread comes loose, the whole thing unravels. And everyone in Silver Creek, everyone has something to lose. Ethan opened the door. Daylight flooded in. Then I reckon it's time to start pulling threads. He walked out into the street and turned toward Dr. Harlan's office. The office was a small building at the end of Main Street, sandwiched between the barber shop and the undertaker, a placement that struck Ethan as grimly appropriate. He climbed the 2 wooden steps and knocked. The door opened almost immediately, as if Harlan had been standing behind it. Dr. Harlan. Who's asking? Ethan Callahan. I'm new in town. I know who you are. Harlan was a small man with thinning hair and the nervous energy of a person who hadn't slept well in weeks. His eyes were red-rimmed. His collar was unbuttoned. He looked like a man slowly coming apart. Can I come in? This about a medical matter. In a way. Harlan hesitated. Then he stepped aside. The office was cluttered books, stacked on tables, medical instruments laid out on a tray that hadn't been cleaned, a desk covered with papers. Ethan noted the whiskey bottle on the shelf behind the desk. It was 3/4 empty. I'll be direct, Ethan said. You examined Clara Whitmore 21 days ago. You wrote in your report that she fell downstairs. Harlan's face collapsed. Not slowly, all at once, like a structure that had been held up by willpower alone and finally gave out. I can't talk about that, he said. His voice was thin, reedy. You're already talking about it. Every time you open that bottle, every time you don't sleep, every time you walk past her telegraph office and can't look through the window. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Walter Baxter pays your rent. If you tell the truth, you lose your practice. Maybe your house, maybe more. He'll destroy me. He's already destroying you, Doc. Look at yourself. Harlan sat down heavily in his desk chair. He put his head in his hands. I have a family, he whispered. A wife. 2 children. If I speak against the Baxters, what happens to them? What happens to your children if they grow up watching their father cover for a man like Colton Baxter? Harlan flinched as if Ethan had slapped him. That's not fair. None of this is fair. That's the whole point. Silence. The clock on Harlan's desk ticked a different clock from Clara's, but the same relentless sound, the same weight of passing time. You kept the real report, Ethan said. Harlan's head came up. His eyes were wide. You wrote 2 versions. The one you filed says she fell. The one you kept says the truth. You put it somewhere safe, somewhere the Baxters wouldn't find it, because you knew someday someone would come asking. How could you possibly know that? Because you're not a bad man, Dr. Harlan. You're a scared man. And scared men hide things. Bad men destroy them. Harlan's breathing was rapid and shallow. He stared at Ethan for what felt like a long time. Then he stood up, walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a thick medical text, Gray's Anatomy, the kind of book no one would open casually. He opened it to the middle. Inside, a sealed envelope was pressed between the pages. He held it out to Ethan with trembling hands. I examined her at 6:30 in the morning, Harlan said. His voice was breaking. She walked 2 miles to my office in the dark because she didn't want anyone to see her. She was, God help me, she was in so much pain she could barely stand. I documented everything. Every bruise, every injury, everything that proved it wasn't a fall. Ethan took the envelope. He didn't open it. I wrote the false report at 8 o'clock. Harlan continued. Walter Baxter's foreman showed up at 7:15, before I had even finished the real examination. He didn't threaten me. He didn't have to. He just stood in my waiting room and read the newspaper until I was done. And when Clara left through the back door, he came in and told me what my report was going to say. And you wrote it. And I wrote it. Tears were running down Harlan's face. He didn't wipe them. I sat at this and I wrote a lie that I knew would keep that woman from ever getting justice, and I did it because I was afraid. Because my wife was pregnant with our second child, and I couldn't lose everything. You already lost everything, Doc. You lost it the moment you picked up that pen. Harlan made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob. I know, he said. God help me, I know. Ethan put the envelope inside his coat. He buttoned it closed. I'm going to use this, he said. When I do, the Baxters will know it came from you. Are you prepared for that?" Harlan wiped his face with both hands. He straightened up, and in his eyes, behind the fear, behind the guilt, behind the whiskey and the sleepless nights, Ethan saw something he recognized, the same thing he had seen in Clara. Fight. Buried deep, nearly extinguished, but still alive. "I'm prepared," Harlan said. "God forgive me for taking 21 days, but I'm prepared." Ethan extended his hand. Harlan looked at it for a moment, then took it. "One more thing," Ethan said. "Clara mentioned other women. Sarah, Annie, a widow named Mrs. Colby." Harlan's face went gray. "How many do you know about way 3? There are 5. The number hit Ethan like a physical blow. 5. 5 women. Years of silence. An entire town stand by while one family's son moved through it like a sickness. "I need those names," Ethan said. "I can give you 3. The other 2, one left the state and one—" Harlan's voice trailed off. "One didn't survive." Ethan went very still. "What do you mean didn't survive?" "Her name was Ruth Jennings. She was a seamstress, lived alone at the edge of town. After Colton, after what happened, she walked into the river on a Sunday morning. They found her downstream near Miller's Crossing. And nobody investigated. Sheriff Frank wrote it up as an accident. Said she slipped on the rocks." Harlan's voice was hollow. "She left a letter. Her sister came from St. Louis to collect her things. The sister asked about the letter. Frank said there was no letter. But I saw it, Mr. Callahan. I saw it on his desk before it disappeared." Ethan felt something shift inside him. Something cold and precise and final. This was no longer a land dispute. This was no longer one woman's testimony against one man. This was a reckoning. "I need to see the property records," Ethan said. "The real ones. Not what the land clerk is showing people, the original surveys, the deeds, the filings. Those are in the county records office, but Walter controls—" "I know who controls what. I need to know where the records are physically kept. There's a vault in the back of the land office. Iron door combination lock. The clerk has the combination, but he won't give it to you." He might not have a choice. Ethan moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. "Doc, I want you to do something for me. Tonight after dark, I want you to go to Clara's boarding house. I want you to look her in the eye and tell her what you just told me. Not the medical details, just the truth, that you're sorry, that you were wrong, that you're ready to make it right." Harlan's face crumbled again. "She won't want to see me." "No, she won't. Go anyway." Ethan walked out of the doctor's office and into the bright morning sun. The envelope in his coat felt heavier than anything he had ever carried, heavier than saddlebags, heavier than timber, heavier than the weight of 15 years of wondering whether the world had any room left in it for people who did the right thing. He walked down Main Street, and for the first time, he noticed people watching him. Not casually. Not the way a small town watches a stranger. Deliberately. From doorways, from windows, from the shadow of the livery stable. Word had spread. The mountain cowboy was asking questions. Ethan turned the corner and nearly walked into a man standing directly in his path. Sheriff Frank Dawson. Frank was bigger than Ethan expected, thick through the chest, heavy-jawed with a star pinned to his vest that looked like it had never been polished and never needed to be. His authority didn't come from a badge. It came from the man who paid his salary. "Mr. Callahan," Frank said. Not a greeting, a statement. The way you'd say the name of a problem you intended to deal with. "Sheriff? I hear you've been busy this morning." "I'm a busy man. I hear you've been visiting folks, asking about things that ain't your concern." "In my experience, Sheriff, the people who tell you something ain't your concern are usually the ones with the most to hide." Frank's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, close enough that Ethan could smell tobacco and leather and something else. Something sour. The smell of a man who had traded his integrity for a paycheck so long ago, he'd forgotten what integrity smelled like. "Let me be plain with you," Frank said. "Silver Creek is a quiet town. We like it that way. Folks who come here stirring up trouble don't tend to stay long." "That a threat, Sheriff?" "It's a fact." "Well, here's another fact. I've got a legal dispute over property boundaries that your land office won't let me resolve. I've got survey maps I can't see and records I can't access. In my experience, when a man can't see his own legal documents, it's because someone's altered them. Frank's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. Calculation. Assessment. The look of the man measuring how much force would be required. You talked to a lawyer about that, Frank said. Silver Creek got a lawyer. Sure does. Thomas Reed. Office next to the bank. Thomas Reed. Ethan paused. Let me guess. He handles the Baxters' legal work. Frank smiled. It wasn't pleasant. He handles everyone's legal work, Mr. Callahan. He's the only lawyer in town. Convenient, ain't it? Frank adjusted his belt. The gesture was deliberate. His hand moved past the holster on his hip with the slow, theatrical precision of a man who wanted you to notice the weapon. I'll tell you what I told the last fella who came through here asking questions. Silver Creek takes care of its own. We don't need outsiders telling us how to run our town. And outsiders who don't listen to friendly advice tend to find the territory inhospitable. That another fact, Sheriff. That's a promise. Frank held Ethan's gaze for 3 long seconds. Then he turned and walked away, his boots heavy on the wooden boardwalk. Ethan stood in the street and watched him go. Then he turned and walked back to Clara's telegraph office. She was behind her desk, standing, hands on the key. She looked up when he walked in, and he could see it in her face she already knew. The sheriff talked to you, she said. He did. And Ethan reached inside his coat. He pulled out the sealed envelope and placed it on her desk. Dr. Harlan kept the real report, he said. Everything he documented that morning. Everything they told him to lie about. Clara stared at the envelope. She didn't touch it. He saved it, she whispered. He saved it. Clara's hand moved toward the envelope, stopped, hovered. Her fingers trembled. I can't open it, she said. You don't have to, not yet. She pulled her hand back, pressed it against her chest. Ethan, she said. He looked at her. She had used his first name for the first time. There are 5 women, she said. Aren't there? He nodded. And Ruth Jennings. He nodded again. Clara closed her eyes. A single tear ran down her cheek, the first tear she had shed in 21 days. She let it fall. She didn't wipe it away. She let it run from her eye to her jaw to her chin and drop onto the wooden desk, where it landed on the sealed envelope like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that had been waiting years to be written. Then we can't just fight for me, Clara said. She opened her eyes. They were clear and hard and burning. We fight for all of them. Ethan looked at the woman standing behind the desk. The woman who hadn't sat down in 3 weeks. The woman an entire town had decided to ignore, the woman who should have been broken beyond repair. And he saw something that made his chest ache with a feeling he hadn't experienced in 15 years of solitude. Pride. Not his pride, hers. Yes, ma'am, he said. We fight for all of them. Clara picked up the envelope. She held it against her chest with both hands, the way you hold something precious, something that could save you or destroy you, depending on who was watching. And somewhere across town, in the study of the largest ranch house in Silver Creek, Walter Baxter set down a glass of whiskey and looked at the man standing in front of his desk. The mountain man, Walter said. Yes, sir. He visited Harlan this morning. Yes, sir. Walter Baxter was 63 years old. He had built Silver Creek from nothing. He had bought land, built fences, hired men, paid officials, and constructed a kingdom that answered to no one. He had done terrible things and justified every one of them as the cost of building something permanent. And in all those years, no one had ever refused to leave when told. Find out everything about him, Walter said. Where he sleeps, where his ranch is, who he talks to, what he cares about. And then, Walter picked up his whiskey glass, took a long, slow drink. Then we remind him what happens to people who don't know their place. They came for Ethan's cabin that same night. He wasn't in it. He had learned a long time ago that a man who sleeps where people expect him to sleep is a man who wakes up dead. So when Walter Baxter's 3 hired men rode up the mountain trail and kicked open the door of the borrowed cabin, even at 2 in the morning, They found cold ashes in the fireplace, an empty bedroll, and a note pinned to the table with a hunting knife. The note said, "You boys ride all this way just to visit an empty room. Tell your boss he'll need to try harder." The men tore the cabin apart anyway, broke the chair, scattered the supplies, poured kerosene on the bedroll and lit it. The fire caught fast, and within minutes, the borrowed cabin was nothing but smoke and orange light against the black mountain sky. Ethan watched it burn from a ridge 300 yards east, sitting with his back against a boulder and his rifle across his knees. He didn't feel anger. Anger was a luxury for men who could afford to lose control. What Ethan felt was confirmation. Walter Baxter had moved from warnings to action in less than 12 hours. That meant Ethan was close to something the Baxters couldn't afford to let him find. He waited until the men rode back down toward Silver Creek. Then he shouldered his pack, and began walking. He reached Clara's boarding house before dawn. He knocked 3 times their signal. 2 short, 1 long. Clara opened the door wearing her day clothes. She hadn't been sleeping either. "They burned your cabin," she said. Not a question. "You heard?" "I saw the light on the mountain. I knew." Ethan stepped inside. Clara closed the door and wedged the chair under the handle. "You can't go back up there," she said. "Wasn't planning to." "Where will you stay?" "I'll figure it out." "Ethan." She said his name firmly, now no hesitation. "You can use the back room of the telegraph office. There's a cot. It's not much, but nobody goes back there." "That puts you in more danger." "I'm already in danger. Having you closer makes me less afraid, not more." Ethan looked at her. In the lamplight, without the armor of her professional composure, Clara Whitmore looked younger than 26. She looked like a woman who had been carrying something impossibly heavy for too long and had just realized she was allowed to set part of it down. "All right," he said. "All right." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Clara said, "Dr. Harlan came to see me tonight." Ethan waited. "He stood on my porch for 5 minutes before he knocked. I watched him through the window. He kept taking his hat off and putting it back on like he was rehearsing what to say." "What did he say?" Clara's voice softened. Not weak, tender. The way a voice sounds when it's carrying something precious and trying not to drop it. "He said he was sorry. He said he wrote the false report because he was afraid, and that being afraid wasn't an excuse, and that he would spend the rest of his life knowing he failed me." She paused. "Then he cried. Right there on my porch. A grown man sobbing into his hands like a child." "What did you do?" "I let him cry. And when he finished, I told him the only thing that mattered wasn't his apology. It was what he did next." "And what did he say to that?" "He said he was ready." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's 2 of us and a doctor. We need more." "I know someone," Clara said. "But you're not going to like it." "Try me." "Margaret Baxter." Ethan stared at her. "Walter's wife. She's been collecting documents for years. Letters, receipts, property filings, evidence of every illegal thing Walter has done since he came to Silver Creek. She keeps them hidden. I don't know where, but I know they exist." "How do you know?" "Because she told me." The silence in the room changed, became charged, electric. "When?" Ethan asked. 6 days after it happened. Margaret came to the telegraph office. She waited until no one else was inside. She closed the door. And she told me she knew what Colton had done to me. She said she had known about her son for years, what he was, what he did. She said she had tried to stop it, tried to talk to Walter. Walter told her to mind her own business. His own wife. His own wife. Margaret said she had been gathering proof of Walter's dealings, the false land claims, the bribed officials, the intimidation, because she believed that someday someone from outside Silver Creek would come. Someone who couldn't be bought or scared. And when that person came, she wanted to be ready. Ethan ran his hand over his jaw. "She's been waiting for someone like me. She's been waiting for anyone. But yes, someone exactly like you." "Can you get a message to her?" "Not directly. Walter watches her. She can't leave the ranch without an escort, but there's a woman who does laundry for the Baxter household, a widow named Eleanor Price. Eleanor picks up and delivers laundry every Tuesday and Friday. She's the only person who goes in and out of that ranch without being questioned. Tomorrow's Tuesday. I know. Ethan looked at Clara Whitmore, standing in her small room at 4 in the morning. Barefoot, planning an operation against the most powerful family in the territory, with the calm precision of a telegraph operator sending code, and he realized something that shifted the ground beneath him. He wasn't protecting her. She was leading this. She had been leading it from the moment she chose to stay in Silver Creek instead of running. Every morning she opened that telegraph office was an act of defiance. Every day she stood behind that desk was a message to the Baxters, I'm still here. You didn't erase me. Ethan had spent 2 days thinking he was the one bringing courage to Silver Creek. But Clara had been courageous long before he arrived. She just hadn't had anyone stand beside her. Tell me about Eleanor, Ethan said. Clara sat down. He noticed it immediately. She lowered herself onto the edge of her bed, slowly, carefully wincing as her weight settled. But she sat. For the first time since he'd known her, Clara Whitmore sat down in front of another person. She didn't comment on it, neither did he. But both of them knew what it meant. Eleanor Price lost her husband 2 years ago, Clara said. He was a ranch hand for the Baxters, fell from a horse and broke his neck. That's the official story. The real story is that he caught Colton stealing cattle from a neighbor's herd and threatened to report it. 2 days later, he was dead. Another accident. Silver Creek specializes in accidents. Does Eleanor know the truth? Eleanor knows everything. She's been inside that house every week for 2 years, and nobody pays attention to the laundry woman. She hears conversations. She sees documents left on desks. She hears conversations. She sees documents left on desks. She knows where Margaret keeps the evidence because Margaret showed her. Why would Margaret trust her? Because Margaret watched Walter destroy Eleanor's husband. And guilt, real guilt, the kind that keeps you up at night, makes people do unexpected things. Margaret and Eleanor have an understanding. They've been waiting. Quietly. Patiently. Like 2 women tending a fire that nobody else can see. Ethan shook his head slowly, not in disbelief and admiration. This whole time, he said, this whole time I thought I was building something, connecting people. But you and Margaret and Eleanor, you already had a network. We had pieces, Clara said. What we didn't have was someone the Baxters couldn't break, someone from outside. What makes you think they can't break me? Clara looked at him steadily. Because they burned your cabin tonight, and you're sitting in my room making plans instead of riding for the state line. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. First thing tomorrow, he said. Eleanor. First thing tomorrow. Eleanor Price arrived at Clara's telegraph office at 9 o'clock Tuesday morning, carrying a basket of folded linens and a face that revealed nothing. She was a small woman, maybe 50, with gray-streaked hair pulled back tight and hands roughened by years of washboard work. She looked like exactly what she was, a widow doing laundry to survive. She also looked like a woman who had been carrying a secret so long it had become part of her skeleton. Miss Whitmore, Eleanor said, setting the basket on the counter. I have Mrs. Baxter's linens for pressing. Thank you, Mrs. Price. Clara's voice was normal, professional, but her eyes moved to the back room where Ethan stood just out of sight. Eleanor followed the glance. Her expression didn't change. Is there someone here I should meet? Eleanor asked. Yes. Ethan stepped into the doorway. Eleanor looked at him the way a woman who has survived hard things looks at a stranger, measuring, calculating, deciding in 3 seconds whether this was someone worth trusting with her life. You're the mountain man, Eleanor said. Ethan Callahan. I know who you are. The whole town knows who you are. The question is whether you're real or whether you're just another man who talks big and disappears when things get ugly. They burned my cabin last night. I heard. I'm still here. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Then she looked at Clara. You trust him. With my life, Clara said. The words were simple and enormous. Clara had known Ethan for 4 days. She had spent 21 days learning that every person in Silver Creek would betray her given enough pressure. And yet she stood in her telegraph office and said those 3 words without hesitation. Eleanor nodded once. Decisive. Final. Margaret has the documents in a lockbox under the floorboards of the guest bedroom, Eleanor said. Second room on the left upstairs. The board is loose, you can feel it if you step on it. The key is inside the spine of a Bible on the bedside table. How do we get them out? You don't go in, I do. Friday is my next delivery. I can have the documents in my laundry basket and walk out the front door. If they catch me, they'll do to me what they did to my husband. I've made my peace with that Mr. Callahan. I made my peace with it the morning they brought Henry home across the back of a horse and told me he fell. Eleanor's voice was steady as bedrock. I've spent 2 years washing that family's sheets and pressing their tablecloths and smiling at the man who killed my husband. I've earned the right to be the one who carries those papers out. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at him. Neither argued. Friday, Ethan said. Friday. Eleanor confirmed. She picked up her basket of linens and walked to the door. She paused. One more thing. Colton has been drinking heavy these past few days, more than usual. Margaret says he's agitated, pacing, shouting at the house staff. He knows something is happening. He can feel it. Dangerous men get more dangerous when they're scared, Ethan said. That's what I'm telling you. Eleanor looked directly at Clara. Don't be alone. Not for 1 minute. Not until this is over. She walked out. Clara and Ethan stood in the office. The clock ticked. The morning sun moved across the floor. Friday is 3 days away, Clara said. A lot can happen in 3 days. I know. They were right. A lot happened. But not on Friday. It happened on Wednesday. Clara was at her desk at 2:30 in the afternoon when the door slammed open and Tom Anderson walked in. Not the Tom Anderson who had sold his homestead and fled to Wyoming. A different Tom Anderson, younger, harder, with the same last name and the same burning resentment, but none of the defeat. This was Tom's brother, Jack Anderson. Jack had ridden into Silver Creek that morning from Leadville, where he worked in the mines. He was 24 years old, sunburned, thick-armed, and furious. You're Clara Whitmore, Jack said. I am. My brother Tom sent me, said a man named Callahan is in town asking about the Baxters. Said things might finally be changing around here. Clara's heart hammered. How did Tom know about Mr. Callahan? Tom still has friends here. People talk. Not loud, but they talk. And when a man shows up and doesn't back down from Walter Baxter, word travels. What do you want, Mr. Anderson? Jack stepped closer. His eyes were intense, desperate, lit with the kind of rage that had been compressed for years. I want what my brother lost. I want that land back. And I want the Baxters to answer for every family they've driven out of this valley. That's a lot of wanting. I've had a lot of years to build it up. Jack pulled a folded paper from his coat. Tom kept copies. Before he left, he went to the land office at night and copied the original survey maps. The ones that show the real boundary lines. The ones the Baxters altered. Clara took the paper, unfolded it, and her breath stopped. It was a survey map dated 1874. The original boundary lines were drawn in black ink, clean and precise. But over them in a different hand, a different ink, a different year, someone had redrawn the lines. Moved them. Shifted boundaries by hundreds of yards. Swallowed homesteads into Baxter land with a few strokes of a pen. This is proof, Clara whispered. That's proof. And Tom's got more. Letters from the county surveyor who was paid to file the false maps. Receipts for the payments. Names, dates, amounts. Where are these documents? Tom mailed them to me in Leadville 6 months ago. I've got them in a safe at the Leadville bank. But I can have them sent here within a week. Clara set the map down on her desk. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. From something else. Something she hadn't felt in 21 days. Power. For the first time since Colton Baxter walked into her office and destroyed her life. Clara Whitmore held something in her hands that could destroy his. Mr. Anderson, I need you to listen to me carefully. The Baxters know something is happening. They've already burned Mr. Callahan's cabin and sent the sheriff to threaten him. If they find out you're here with original survey maps, your life is in danger. I didn't ride 2 days from Leadville to be safe. I'm not asking you to be safe. I'm asking you to be smart. Don't tell anyone else you're here. Don't go to the saloon. Don't talk to the sheriff. Stay at the boarding house behind the church and don't answer the door for anyone except me or Ethan Callahan." Jack studied her face. Whatever he saw there convinced him. "Tom told me about you," he said. "He said you were the toughest woman in Silver Creek. Said what happened to you should have broken you 10 times over. It broke me once. That was enough. He also said you were the only person in this town worth fighting for." Clara met his eyes. "I was wrong. There are a lot of people in this town worth fighting for. They just forgot." Jack Anderson nodded. He folded the map and placed it back on the desk. "I'll be at the boarding house. You know where to find me." He walked out. Clara immediately locked the front door, turned the sign to closed, and went to the back room where Ethan was reviewing Dr. Harlan's medical report. "We have survey maps," she said. "Original boundary documents. Proof that the Baxters forged land claims." Ethan looked up. "Who brought them?" "Tom Anderson's brother Jack. He rode in from Leadville. Tom kept copies before he was driven out." Ethan stood slowly. "Survey maps. Harlan's medical report. Margaret's lockbox on Friday. Jack's documents from Leadville." "It's enough," Clara said. "If we can get it all to the right people, it's enough." "The right people aren't in Silver Creek." "No, they're in Denver, the Federal Territorial Office." "Can you telegraph them?" Clara paused. Her face changed. A shadow crossed it. "I can try. But the telegraph line from Silver Creek goes through a relay station in Pueblo. The Baxters don't own Pueblo, but they have friends there. If I send a message directly to the federal office, there's a chance someone in Pueblo reads it first and sends word back to Walter. Then we need a different route. There isn't one. Silver Creek has one telegraph line, one road out, one stage route. The Baxters chose this location because it's isolated. Getting information out of this town without them knowing is nearly impossible." Ethan rubbed his jaw. Thought. The gears turned behind those quiet eyes. "Nearly impossible," he repeated. "But not completely." "What are you thinking?" "The telegraph goes through Pueblo, but the mail doesn't." Clara blinked. "The mail goes on the stage. The stage driver is..." "Not the regular stage. I'm talking about the mining supply wagons that come through from Leadville. Jack Anderson rode in from Leadville. That means there's a route that doesn't go through Pueblo. The mountain road. It goes north through the pass and connects to the Leadville route. If I can get the documents to Leadville, Jack can put them on a train to Denver. Direct line, no relay, no Pueblo, no Baxter connections." Clara stared at him. "That road is barely passable. It takes 2 days on horseback. In summer it's manageable, but if it rains..." "I've ridden worse." "You don't have a horse. I'll get one. From who the livery stable is run by Baxter's cousin." Ethan paused. Then slowly a look crossed his face that Clara hadn't seen before. Something that almost resembled amusement. "You said Henry Dawson is ashamed of his brother." "The sheriff's brother, yes. Henry's a farmer. Farmers have horses." "You think Henry Dawson will lend you a horse to ride evidence against the Baxters to Leadville?" "I think Henry Dawson has been waiting for a chance to stop being ashamed. He just needs someone to ask him." Clara shook her head slowly. "You see things in people that they don't see in themselves." "I see what's already there, Miss Whitmore. I just don't look away from it." Ethan found Henry Dawson at his farm south of town. The wheat farmer was in his barn mending a harness when Ethan walked in. Henry's hands froze. His eyes went wide with the particular terror of a man who has been expecting a visitor he dreads. "Mr. Callahan." "Mr. Dawson." "I don't want trouble." "Neither do I. But trouble's already here, and it's been here a lot longer than me." Henry set the harness down. His hands were trembling. Clara's hands. Martha's hands. Harlan's hands. The whole town trembling with the same buried fear. "I know what you're doing," Henry said. "The whole town knows. You're going after the Baxters." "I'm going after the truth. The Baxters just happen to be standing in front of it." "My brother is the sheriff." "I know. If I help you, Frank will..." Henry stopped, swallowed. "He's my brother, Mr. Callahan. Whatever he's become, he's still my brother." Ethan sat down on a hay bale. He took off his hat. He looked at Henry Dawson the way he'd look at a horse that had been beaten steady without judgment, without hurry. "Henry, do you remember the night it happened?" Henry's face collapsed. "You were at the saloon," Ethan continued. "You heard sounds. You knew what was happening across the street, and you ordered another drink. Please. I ain't judging you. I'm telling you what happened because I need you to remember what it felt like. That moment. When you heard a woman in trouble, and you chose the drink instead." Henry's eyes were red. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his neck stood out like ropes. "It felt like dying," Henry whispered. "Every night since then it feels like dying." "You can stop dying, Henry. Right now. Today." "How?" "I need a horse. A fast one. I need it for 2 days. I'm riding to Leadville with documents that will bring the Baxters down. Not just for Clara. For Tom Anderson. For Mrs. Colby. For Ruth Jennings, who walked into the river because nobody in this town had the spine to help her." Henry flinched at Ruth's name. "You knew Ruth?" Ethan asked. She was kind. She used to bring bread to my wife on Sundays." Henry's voice cracked. "When she died, I told myself it was an accident. Because if it wasn't an accident, then all of us. Then all of you let it happen." Henry covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. He cried the way men cry who have forgotten how in gulps and gasps, ugly and raw and long overdue. Ethan waited. When Henry finally lowered his hands, his face was different. The fear was still there. It would probably always be there, but underneath it, something had shifted, like a foundation cracking and resettling on new ground. "The bay mare," Henry said. "In the 3rd stall. She's the fastest horse I've got. She'll run for you." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just make it count. For Ruth, for Clara, for all of them." "I will." "And Mr. Callahan." "Yeah. My brother Frank. When this is over, when the Baxters fall, he'll fall too, won't he?" Ethan put his hat back on. "That depends on whether he chooses to fall with them or stand up while he still can." "He won't stand up. I know my brother." "People surprise you, Henry. I've seen it happen." "Not Frank." Ethan didn't argue. Some truths a man had to come to on his own. He took the bay mare and led her back toward town as the sun dropped. He stabled her behind the telegraph office out of sight. Then he went inside and found Clara and Jack Anderson sitting at her desk with maps spread between them. "We have a problem," Clara said. "What kind?" "Colton Baxter came into town an hour ago, drunk. He went to the saloon and started talking, loud. He told everyone he was going to deal with the mountain man personally. Let him come." "Ethan, he had a gun. Most men in Colorado have guns." "Most men in Colorado haven't done what he's done to me. He's not thinking straight. He's scared, and he's drunk, and he's dangerous." Jack Anderson spoke up. "There's more. I was at the boarding house when I saw 2 of Baxter's ranch hands ride into town. They didn't stop at the saloon. They went straight to the sheriff's office." Ethan processed this. 2 ranch hands plus the sheriff plus a drunk Colton with a gun. 4 men at minimum, probably more. "They're not waiting for Friday," Clara said. "They know something is building. Walter is tightening the noose." "Then we move the timeline up." "How Eleanor can't get the documents from Margaret until Friday." "Then we don't wait for Margaret's documents. We go with what we have. Harlan's medical report, Jack's survey maps, and Clara's testimony. We send Jack to Leadville tonight with everything we've got." Jack straightened up. "I'll ride. Give me the documents, and I'll be in Leadville by Thursday morning. I'll put them on the noon train to Denver." "It's not enough," Clara said. Her voice was tight, strained. "The survey maps prove the land fraud. Harlan's report proves the cover-up. But without Margaret's documents, the receipts, the letters, the full record of Walter's corruption, a federal investigator might only see pieces. They might decide it's a local matter. They might send it back to the county." "Then we need Margaret's documents before Friday," Ethan said. "Tonight." "That's impossible. The ranch is guarded. Walter has men watching every entrance. Eleanor is the only person who can get in without being stopped." "Then we get Eleanor tonight." Clara stared at him. "Eleanor isn't scheduled for delivery until Friday. If she shows up at the ranch unannounced, Walter will know something is wrong. Ethan turned to Jack. Does the Baxter Ranch have a back entrance, service road, cattle trail, anything? There's a creek that runs along the east side of the property. My brother used to fish it. There's a gap in the fence where the water comes through. If Eleanor goes in through the creek gap, can she reach the house without being seen? Jack thought about it. At night, maybe. The bunkhouse is on the west side. If the ranch hands are in town, and you said 2 of them came in today, that's 2 fewer men watching. Clara stood up. She was pacing now, her hands clenched, her mind working faster than her body could follow. This is insane, she said. We're asking a widow to sneak onto a guarded ranch in the middle of the night to steal documents from under the floorboards while a man who killed her husband sleeps in the next room. We're asking her to finish what she started 2 years ago, Ethan said quietly. Clara stopped pacing. She looked at him. You're right, she said. God help me, you're right. They found Eleanor Price at her small house at the edge of town. She was heating water for laundry when they knocked. She opened the door, looked at the 3 of them and said, It's tonight, isn't it? It's tonight, Ethan said. Eleanor dried her hands on her apron. I've been ready for 2 years. Give me an hour. At 10 o'clock that night, Eleanor Price walked into the darkness along the creek bed east of the Baxter Ranch with nothing but a laundry sack and the kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. Ethan waited at the creek gap. Jack waited with the horses a half-mile south. Clara waited at the telegraph office with her hand on the key, ready to send the most important message of her life the moment the documents were in hand. The minutes crawled by. Ethan counted them the way he counted heartbeats on a dangerous trail, steady, deliberate, aware that each one could be the last before everything changed. 20 minutes. 30. 40. At 47 minutes, a shape moved in the darkness along the creek bed. Small, quick, breathing hard. Eleanor. She was carrying the laundry sack against her chest like a child. Her dress was soaked from the creek. Her hair had come loose from its pins. Her hands were muddy, and her breathing was ragged, and her eyes were wild with something that lived on the border between terror and triumph. I got them, Eleanor gasped. I got everything. Ethan reached for her arm to steady her. She pulled back, instinct the flinch of a woman who had learned not to trust hands in the dark, then recognized him and grabbed his sleeve with both fists. There was a guard, she said. New one, young. He was sitting on the back porch smoking. I had to wait under the house for 20 minutes until he went inside. Did he see you? No, but Margaret did. Ethan went still. Margaret saw you. She was awake, sitting in the guest bedroom in the dark, like she was waiting. When I came through the window, she was already kneeling by the floorboard with the Bible in her hands. She had the key out. She had the lockbox open. She handed me the documents, and she said, Eleanor's voice broke. She pressed her knuckles against her mouth and breathed through them. What did she say? Eleanor lowered her hand. Her eyes were shining. She said, Tell Clara I should have done this the day it happened. Tell her I'm sorry it took me so long to be the mother my son never let me be. Ethan took the laundry sack. It was heavier than he expected. He opened it and pulled out a leather-bound lockbox, the kind a woman might keep jewelry in. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Letters in Walter Baxter's handwriting. Receipts signed with his name. Property filings with forged signatures. Bank records showing payments to Sheriff Frank Dawson, to the county surveyor, to the land office clerk. And at the bottom, folded carefully and sealed with wax, a letter in Margaret Baxter's hand, addressed to the Federal Territorial Office in Denver. Ethan didn't read it. Not yet. He closed the lockbox and put it back in the sack. We need to move, he said. Now. They went south along the creek to where Jack Anderson waited with the horses. Jack took one look at Eleanor's face and the sack in Ethan's hands and swung into the saddle without a word. Ethan handed up the sack. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the sealed envelope, Dr. Harlan's real medical report, and the copied survey maps Jack had brought from Leadville. Everything goes to the federal office, Ethan said. Harlan's report, the maps, Margaret's lockbox. You ride straight through. Don't stop in Pueblo. Don't stop anywhere until you hit Leadville. And from Leadville, noon train to Denver. You walk into the territorial office and you put this on the desk of the first federal officer you find. You tell them Silver Creek, Colorado. You tell them Walter Baxter. You tell them it's been going on for 12 years and a woman is dead. Jack looked down at him from the saddle. His face was hard and young and resolved in the way that only a man with a debt to settle can be resolved. My brother lost everything because of these people, Jack said. I ain't gonna let that ride be for nothing. Then go. Jack spurred the bay mare. She lunged forward and disappeared into the darkness heading north toward the mountain pass. Ethan listened to the hoofbeats fade until there was nothing left but the sound of the creek and Eleanor's breathing. Come on, he said. I need to get you somewhere safe. Take me to Clara. They reached the telegraph office at midnight. Clara was standing behind her desk, always standing with both hands flat on the wood and her face tight with the particular agony of waiting. When Ethan and Eleanor walked through the back door, Clara looked at Eleanor, and Eleanor looked at Clara, and something passed between them that needed no words. A recognition. A bond forged not in friendship, but in survival. Two women who had endured the same machine and refused to be ground down by it. It's done, Clara asked. Jack's writing, Ethan said. He has everything. Harlan's report, the maps, Margaret's documents. Clara closed her eyes. Her hands pressed harder against the desk. Her body swayed just slightly, just for a moment, like a woman who had been holding herself rigid for so long that the prospect of release was more terrifying than the pain. How long until he reaches Leadville? She whispered. If he rides through the night Thursday morning. Noon train puts the documents in Denver by Friday evening. And the federal office, Monday at the latest. Clara opened her eyes. That's 5 days. 5 days before anyone with authority knows what's been happening here. I know. Walter will figure out the documents are gone before then. Margaret can't hide that. He'll know by morning. I know. So what happens in the next 5 days? Ethan looked at her, then at Eleanor, then back at Clara. We hold, he said. We hold this town together for 5 days. They didn't get 5 days. They got 14 hours. At 2 o'clock Thursday afternoon, Walter Baxter rode into Silver Creek at the head of 6 men on horseback. He stopped in the middle of Main Street and dismounted with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who had stopped pretending. The mask was off. He walked directly to the telegraph office. Clara saw him coming through the window. She turned to Ethan, who was in the back room. He's here, she said. Her voice was calm, preternaturally calm. The calm of a woman who had spent 21 days preparing for the worst and had finally arrived at it. How many men? 6, plus the sheriff. Frank's with him. Ethan came to the front. He looked through the window. 7 men, armed. Walter Baxter at the center, his face carved from stone, his eyes scanning the street with the cold calculation of a general surveying a battlefield. He knows about the documents, Ethan said. He knows. Walter reached the telegraph office door. He didn't knock. He pushed it open and walked in like a man entering a room he owned, which in his mind he did. He looked at Clara, then at Ethan. Where are they? Walter said. Clara didn't answer. The documents my wife stole. Where are they? Gone, Ethan said. Walter's jaw tightened. A vein pulsed at his temple. But his voice remained controlled, the voice of a man who had spent decades maintaining power through precision, not rage. You don't understand what you've done, Walter said. Those papers are private family property. You've committed theft. I'll have the sheriff arrest both of you before sundown. Go ahead, Ethan said. Arrest us. Put us in a cell. By the time we go to trial, a federal investigator will be in Silver Creek with 12 years of evidence showing how you stole land, bribed officials, covered up crimes, and destroyed lives. Walter's control cracked. Just a fraction. A flicker in his eyes, not fear exactly, but the first cousin of fear. The recognition that the game had changed, and he hadn't been the one to change it. You're bluffing. Ask your wife. She's the one who kept the records. Walter's face went white. Not pale white, the color of a man who has just discovered that the person sleeping beside him for 30 years has been building a case against him the entire time. Margaret wouldn't. Margaret did. She collected every letter, every receipt, every forged document. She cataloged your crimes the way a librarian catalogs books, careful, thorough, and patient. She's been waiting 12 years for this moment, Mr. Baxter. 12 years. Walter staggered. It was subtle, a half-step backward, a hand reaching for the doorframe. But Ethan saw it, and Clara saw it, and everyone on Main Street who was watching through their windows saw it. The most powerful man in Silver Creek had lost his footing. Then Colton walked in. He pushed past his father and came straight for Ethan. Drunk, eyes red, hands shaking not with fear, with fury. The fury of a man who has never been told no and is hearing it for the first time. "You son of a—" Colton lunged. Ethan didn't move until the last second. Then he sidestepped, fluid, economical, the movement of a man who had spent 15 years navigating physical danger, and caught Colton's arm as it swung past. He didn't hit him. He held him. Held him the way you hold a dangerous animal, firm enough to control, careful enough not to provoke. "I ain't gonna fight you, Colton," Ethan said. His voice was low and steady and carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Not because I can't, because you ain't worth the bruises." Colton struggled, twisted, spat. His father grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back. "Enough," Walter hissed. "He's lying," Colton shouted. "Whatever they told him, it's lies. She wanted it, she—" "Enough." Walter Baxter's voice cracked through the room like a gunshot. Colton went silent. The rage in his eyes collapsed into something smaller and uglier, the petulant confusion of a child whose tantrum has been interrupted. Clara spoke. Her voice cut through the silence like a telegraph signal, clear, precise, and carrying a message that could not be unsent. "I didn't want it," she said. "I said no. I fought. You held me down. And every person in this town heard it happen and did nothing." She stepped out from behind the desk, stood in the open, exposed, vulnerable, and more powerful than anyone in that room had ever seen her. "You took something from me that night, Colton. Something I can never get back. But you did not take my voice, and you will hear it now." The door opened behind Walter, not one of his men. Dr. Harlan. "Doctor." The doctor walked in with his medical bag in one hand and his spine straighter than it had been in 3 weeks. Behind him came Henry Dawson, the wheat farmer, his hat in his hands, and his face set with the grim determination of a man who has decided that dying of shame is worse than dying of fear. Behind Henry came Martha Greenfield, still trembling, still afraid but present. Standing in the doorway with her hand pressed against her heart. Behind Martha came 3 more people, then 4, then 7. They filed into the telegraph office and spilled out onto the porch and onto the street, until Walter Baxter was surrounded, not by enemies, not by a mob, but by the town he had controlled for 12 years, finally looking him in the eye. "It's over, Walter," Dr. Harlan said. His voice shook, but it held. "I wrote 2 reports. The real one is on its way to Denver. I'm done lying for you. I'm done lying for your son." Walter looked at the faces around him, searching for allies, searching for the fear he had cultivated for so long. He found none. Sheriff Frank Dawson stood at the back of the crowd. His badge caught the light. His hand rested on his belt, not on his gun, just on his belt, the posture of a man who was deciding in real time which side of history he wanted to stand on. Henry Dawson looked at his brother across the crowd. "Frank," Henry said. Just the name. Just his brother's name, spoken with 20 years of love and disappointment and desperate hope, compressed into a single syllable. Frank Dawson looked at his brother. Looked at Walter Baxter. Looked at Clara Whitmore standing in the middle of her own telegraph office, with tears on her cheeks and iron in her spine. He unpinned his badge, held it in his palm, looked at it like a man looking at a wound he had been carrying for too long. Then he set it on Clara's desk. "I'm done," Frank said. Walter Baxter stood in the center of the room and understood for the first time in his life what it felt like to be powerless. Not because someone had taken his money, not because someone had burned his ranch or stolen his cattle or beaten him in a fight, because an entire town had decided in a single afternoon that his power was a lie they were no longer willing to tell. "This isn't over," Walter said, but his voice was hollow, a reflex, the last twitch of a muscle that had already died. "You're right," Clara said. "It's not over. It won't be over until a federal court hears every name, every date, every document. It won't be over until Ruth Jennings's sister knows the truth about how she died. It won't be over until every family you drove out of this valley knows that someone finally stood up." She paused. "But the silence. The silence is over, Mr. Baxter. And it's never coming back." Walter Baxter walked out of the telegraph office. His men followed. Colton stumbled after them, still drunk, still confused, still unable to comprehend that the world he had been promised, the world where his name meant immunity and his desires meant entitlement, had ended in the time it took a woman to say 4 words. "I said no." The crowd stood in the street and watched the Baxters ride out of town. Nobody cheered. This wasn't a celebration. It was something quieter and heavier and more important than that. It was a town remembering what it felt like to tell the truth. The federal investigator arrived the following Tuesday. His name was William Marsh, and he was a no-nonsense career lawman from the Denver Territorial Office who had been investigating land fraud in the Colorado mountains for 2 years. Jack Anderson's delivery had landed on his desk like a gift from heaven, the kind of comprehensive documented evidence that investigators dream about and rarely receive. Marsh brought 2 deputies and a federal warrant. He interviewed Clara for 3 hours. She sat in a chair for the entire interview. It hurt. She did it anyway. When Marsh asked her if she was sure she wanted to proceed, because proceeding meant a public trial, meant testifying, meant saying out loud what had been done to her in front of judges and lawyers and strangers. Clara looked at him with eyes that had stopped being afraid 21 days ago and simply hadn't known it yet. "I'm sure," she said. Marsh interviewed Dr. Harlan. Interviewed Eleanor Price. Took statements from Henry Dawson and Martha Greenfield and 11 other Silver Creek residents who came forward in the days after the Baxters' confrontation. He reviewed Margaret Baxter's documents, every letter, every receipt, every forged filing, and called them the most thorough private collection of evidence he had ever seen. "This woman built a prosecution's case all by herself," Marsh told his deputies, "in a house controlled by the man she was building it against for 12 years. Margaret Baxter gave her own statement voluntarily. She sat across from Marsh in the parlor of the ranch house, the same parlor where her husband had planned the destruction of families for over a decade, and spoke for 4 hours without stopping. When she finished, Marsh asked her why she hadn't come forward sooner. Margaret looked at him with the hollow patience of a woman who had waited longer than any person should have to wait. "Because I needed someone to carry the truth out of this house," she said. "And until Ethan Callahan walked into this town, there was no one strong enough to carry it." The indictments came down 3 weeks later. Walter Baxter was charged with 12 counts of land fraud, 4 counts of witness intimidation, 2 counts of obstruction of justice and conspiracy to conceal a felony. Colton Baxter was charged with assault. The charge was severe. The evidence was overwhelming. Harlan's medical report, Clara's testimony, and the corroborating accounts of women who had left Silver Creek rather than face what Clara had faced, women who now finally came back to tell their truths. Sarah, the schoolteacher, traveled from her sister's house in Missouri. Annie, the ranch hand's daughter, came from California. Mrs. Colby sent a written statement from Kansas that was 12 pages long and stained with tears. Sheriff Frank Dawson was charged with dereliction of duty and conspiracy. He pleaded guilty before the trial began. He stood in the courtroom and said 6 words that his brother Henry would remember for the rest of his life. "I knew, and I did nothing." The trial lasted 9 days. Clara testified on the 3rd day. She walked to the front of the courtroom. She placed her hand on the Bible. She swore to tell the truth, and then she sat down. She sat in the witness chair and she told the truth, the whole truth, every detail, every moment, in a voice that never wavered and never broke, and never once looked away from the faces of the men who had believed they could silence her. When she finished, the courtroom was quiet. Not the silence of Silver Creek, the complicit, cowardly silence that had allowed one family to destroy lives for 12 years. A different silence. The silence of people hearing the truth and knowing finally that they could never unhear it. Colton Baxter was convicted. Walter Baxter was convicted. The judge called their crimes a systematic assault on the rights and dignity of an entire community and sentenced them accordingly. Clara walked out of the courtroom into the afternoon sun. Ethan was waiting on the steps. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just stood there tall and quiet and steady, the way a pine tree stands, the way a mountain stands, and waited for her to come to him. Clara stopped in front of him. She looked up at his face, that wind-burned, patient face, and she said the only thing that mattered. "Thank you for seeing me." Ethan nodded once, slow, the way he did everything. "You were always worth seeing, Miss Whitmore." Clara shook her head. "Clara!" Something in Ethan's eyes shifted, softened, warmed. "Clara," he said, and for the first time in a very long time, the name didn't feel like something to hide behind. It felt like something to stand on. Clara didn't go back to Silver Creek right away. She stayed in Denver for 6 days after the trial ended. Not because she needed to, the federal office had released her after testimony. The paperwork was filed. The verdicts were sealed. She stayed because she wasn't ready. Wasn't ready to go home. Wasn't ready to feel what going home would mean. For 21 days. Silver Creek had been the place that broke her. For the weeks after that, it had been the battlefield where she fought. And now, with the Baxters convicted, and the sheriff stripped of his badge, and the whole rotten structure pulled down to its foundations, Clara Whitmore had to decide what Silver Creek would be next. She sat in a boarding house in Denver, sat in a real chair at a real table, without pain sharp enough to blind her, and she wrote letters. She wrote to Sarah, the schoolteacher, who had testified with shaking hands and a voice that carried the weight of 3 years of exile. Clara thanked her for coming back. Sarah wrote back the same day, "I didn't come back for the trial. I came back because you stood up first." She wrote to Annie's family in California. The letter was short. Clara didn't know what to say to the parents of a girl whose life had been redirected by one man's cruelty. She said the only thing she could: "Your daughter's name was spoken in a courtroom, and the man who hurt her is paying for it." Annie's mother replied with a single line, "God bless you, Miss Whitmore. God bless the cowboy, too." She wrote to Ruth Jennings's sister in St. Louis. That letter took 3 hours. Clara rewrote it 11 times. She told Ruth's sister about the letter, the one Ruth had left before she walked into the river, the one Sheriff Frank had destroyed. She told her that Frank had confessed to destroying it during the trial. She told her that Ruth's name had been entered into the federal record, that her death was no longer an accident, that the word they used now was the word it had always been. Ruth's sister never wrote back. Some grief doesn't have a response. Clara understood that. On the 7th day, she packed her bag and boarded the stage to Silver Creek. Ethan was waiting at the depot. He was leaning against a post with his arms folded and his hat low, looking exactly the way he had looked the first time she saw him. Quiet, wind-burned, observing the world with the patient attention of a man who had spent his life reading things that most people walked past without noticing. Clara stepped down from the stage. Her bag was in one hand. Her other hand hung at her side, open, empty, uncertain. "You didn't have to meet me," she said. "I know. You could have been halfway back to your ranch by now." "I could have." "Why aren't you?" Ethan looked at her. That steady look. The one that had seen her pain before she was ready to name it, that had recognized her fight before she knew she was fighting, that had refused to look away when an entire town had perfected the art of blindness. "You know why," he said. Clara's throat tightened. She swallowed hard and looked away, not because she was afraid of what she saw in his eyes, but because she was afraid of what he might see in hers. "The town," she said, changing direction the way a woman does when she's not ready for a conversation her heart is already having. "How is it different?" "Different how?" "Come see." They walked into Silver Creek together, side by side. Not touching Clara was not ready for touching, might not be ready for a long time, and Ethan understood that, without being told, the way he understood weather patterns and animal tracks and the silent language of things that communicate without words. The first thing Clara noticed was the telegraph office. Someone had painted the door. The old door had been scuffed and weathered, the paint peeling in strips like dead skin. Now it was a deep blue, clean, sharp new. The kind of blue that says someone cared enough to choose a color instead of just slapping on whatever was cheapest. Clara stopped walking. "Who did this?" she asked. "Henry Dawson." "Henry painted my door." "Henry painted your door, fixed the porch railing, and replaced the window frame that was rotting on the east side. He showed up the morning after the trial and worked for 2 days straight. Didn't say a word to anyone. Just worked." Clara touched the door with her fingertips. The paint was dry and smooth, and something about the gesture. Her hand on the blue surface, tentative and disbelieving, broke something open inside her chest that she had been holding shut for weeks. "He couldn't look at me," she whispered. "That first morning. He came in with his telegraph, and he couldn't look at my face. He's looking now." Clara pushed the door open and walked inside. Her desk was the same. The telegraph key was in its place. The clock on the wall still ticked with the same relentless rhythm. But there were flowers on the counter. Wildflowers, the kind that grew along the creek stuffed into a mason jar with no arrangement or skill, just grabbed by the handful and placed there by someone who didn't know anything about flowers, but knew that empty spaces sometimes need filling. A note was tucked under the jar. Clara picked it up. She read it once, then again, then a third time because the words kept blurring. It said, "Dear Miss Whitmore, I am sorry. I am sorry for every morning I came into your office and pretended you were fine. I am sorry for the coins I placed on your desk without touching your hand. I am sorry for the door I walked through without looking back. I am sorry I was a coward. Your telegraph office is the most important building in Silver Creek, and you are the most important person in it. Welcome home. Henry Dawson." Clara set the note down. She pressed both hands flat on the desk, the gesture that had become her anchor, her survival mechanism, her way of holding herself upright when the world wanted her on her knees, and she let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside her lungs for a lifetime. Then she sat down. She pulled her chair out from behind the desk, the chair she hadn't used in weeks, the chair that represented every moment of pain and every act of defiance, and she sat in it. It hurt. Her ribs still ached. Her back still carried the memory of what had been done to her. Healing was not a switch that flipped when a jury said guilty. Healing was slow and messy and non-linear, and sometimes sitting in a chair still sent fire through places that should never have been touched by violence. But she sat, and the pain was bearable, not because it had lessened, but because it no longer meant what it used to mean. The pain used to mean she was alone, that nobody saw, that nobody cared, that she was invisible and disposable, and trapped in a town that had decided her suffering was less important than its comfort. Now the pain was just pain, and pain Clara had learned she could handle. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched her sit down. He didn't comment, didn't congratulate her, didn't make it a moment. He just stood there quiet as always and let her have it. After a while, Clara said, "Eleanor." "She's home. The federal office offered to relocate her for safety, but she refused. Said she'd lived in Silver Creek for 23 years and wasn't about to let a dead man's ghost run her out. She called Walter a dead man. She called Walter irrelevant. Said the only ghost she was worried about was her husband's, and she reckoned Henry could finally rest easy." Clara almost smiled. "Dr. Harlan." "Still practicing. He's got a new sign on his door. Replaced the old one. The new one says, Dr. James Harlan Honest Medicine." Martha Greenfield told him it was the most ridiculous sign she'd ever seen. He told her honesty was new for him, and he wanted to practice it in public. This time Clara did smile. Small, fragile, but real. "And Margaret?" Ethan's expression shifted. Complicated. The way a face looks when it's holding multiple truths at once. "Margaret left the ranch. She's staying with her sister in Colorado Springs. She filed for separation from Walter. She told the federal investigator she would testify in any future proceedings as a state's witness. She gave up everything. She gave up a prison. That's different from giving up everything." Clara leaned back in her chair. The movement sent a dull ache through her spine, but she let it come and let it pass. She looked at the clock on the wall, at the telegraph key on her desk, at the flowers in the mason jar. At the man standing in her doorway. Ethan? Yeah. What about you? He tilted his head slightly. What about me? Your cabin is gone. Your land dispute isn't resolved. You came to Silver Creek for a boundary question and ended up tearing down the most powerful family in the territory. What happens to you now? Ethan took off his hat, ran his hand through his hair, put the hat back on. It was the most uncertain gesture Clara had ever seen him make, this man who moved through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who always knew exactly where he stood. I've been thinking about that, he said. And I've been thinking that maybe a man who spent 15 years alone on a mountain was alone for a reason. Maybe I was waiting for something. Didn't know what. Didn't know I was waiting. Just lived my days and read my storms and kept moving because moving was all I knew. He paused. Then I walked into a telegraph office and met a woman who couldn't sit down. And something, I don't know what to call it, something in me said, stop. Clara's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Ethan. I ain't good at this, he said. I've talked to horses and trees and weather fronts more than I've talked to people. I don't have pretty words. I don't know how to say things the way a man's supposed to say them. You don't need pretty words. Then I'll use plain ones. I don't want to go back up that mountain alone. I spent 15 years alone because I thought that was what I deserved punishment for not being big enough to save my mother. But standing here watching what you did, what you survived, and how you survived it, I think maybe I wasn't being punished. I think I was being prepared. Prepared for what? For this. For you. For a fight I was always supposed to show up for. Clara stood up from her chair. She stood the way she had always stood, straight, deliberate, rooted. But this time, it wasn't because sitting hurt. It was because some things need to be said on your feet. I'm not healed, she said. I may never be fully healed. There are days when I can't be touched, and nights when I can't sleep, and mornings when I wake up, and for 3 seconds I forget what happened, and then I remember, and it feels like the first time all over again. I know. I may never be the woman I was before that night. I don't want the woman you were before. I want the woman you are now. The one who stood for 21 days. The one who fought a whole town. The one who sat in a witness chair and told the truth with the eyes of the world on her. That woman is broken, Ethan. That woman is the strongest person I've ever met. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She let them come. She had spent 21 days refusing to cry, and then she had spent weeks crying only in private in the dark where no one could see weakness. But this wasn't weakness. This was something else entirely. This was the feeling of being known. Not seen. She had been seen since the day Ethan walked through her door. Known. Understood at the level where understanding becomes its own form of intimacy, deeper than touch, more lasting than words. I'm going to need time, she said. I've got nothing but time. I'm going to need patience. 15 years alone on a mountain, Clara. I wrote the book on patience. She laughed. It came out broken and wet and unexpected, and it was the most beautiful sound either of them had ever heard. Okay, she said. Okay. Stay. Ethan Callahan nodded once. Slow. The way he did everything that mattered. Yes, ma'am. The months that followed changed. Silver Creek, the way seasons change. A landscape gradually, unevenly, with setbacks and surprises and long stretches where nothing seemed to move at all. The Baxter Ranch was seized by the territorial government. The land was resurveyed properly this time by federal surveyors who answered to Denver instead of Silver Creek, and the stolen acreage was returned to the families who had been driven out. Tom Anderson got his homestead back. He rode in from Wyoming with his wife and 3 children on a Wednesday in October and stood on his own land for the first time in 4 years and wept into his hands while his children ran through the fields, not understanding why their father was crying, but knowing in the way children know things that these were the right kind of tears. Mrs. Colby returned from Kansas. Her boarding house was rebuilt by volunteers, Henry Dawson among them, working without pay, without complaint, driven by the relentless engine of a guilt being slowly converted into something useful. Eleanor Price continued doing laundry. People offered her money recognition, a formal commendation from the territorial office. She refused everything. "I carried a sack of papers through a creek in the dark," she said. "That's not courage. Courage is what Clara did every morning for 21 days. I just did the laundry." Dr. Harlan kept his ridiculous sign. His practice grew. People who had avoided him during the Baxter years came back. Not because they had forgiven him, but because his honesty once it started proved to be as reliable as his dishonesty had been. He treated Clara's lingering injuries without charge and without looking away, and each examination was an act of penance that neither of them acknowledged aloud. A new sheriff was appointed. Not Frank Dawson. Frank left Silver Creek 2 weeks after the trial and was never heard from again. Henry received one letter from him postmarked from a small town in Nebraska. It said, "I'm sorry, brother. I'm trying to be better. I don't know if I'll succeed." Henry kept the letter in the same drawer where Clara kept Henry's note evidence of imperfect people attempting imperfect redemption. Ethan settled his land dispute. The original boundary lines were restored, confirming what he had always known. The Baxters had moved his fences by 300 yards, absorbing a strip of his mountain pasture into their empire of stolen ground. He rebuilt his cabin. Not alone, Henry helped, and Jack Anderson rode up from Leadville, and even old Mr. Greenfield from the general store showed up with a wagon full of lumber, and an apology he delivered while hammering nails, which was the only way he knew how to say he was sorry. But Ethan didn't live in the cabin alone anymore. He split his time between the mountain and Silver Creek. 3 days up, 4 days down. Then 2 days up, 5 days down. Then 1 day up, 6 days down. The mountain pulled him the way it always had: the silence, the clean air, the honest solitude. But Silver Creek pulled him harder. Clara pulled him harder. They moved slowly. So slowly that Martha Greenfield once told Eleanor it was like watching two porcupines trying to embrace. But slow was what Clara needed, and slow was what Ethan gave, because he understood in the deep, wordless way. He understood storms and seasons, and the migration patterns of elk, that some things cannot be rushed without being ruined. They had coffee together every morning. Ethan brought it in the same tin cup he had used that first time. Clara drank it black like he did. They talked about telegraph messages and weather and the price of grain and the new family moving into the Anderson homestead. They talked about ordinary things and the ordinariness of it. The simple, unremarkable domesticity of two people sharing a morning was more intimate than any declaration of love either of them could have spoken. Because love, Clara learned, was not a grand gesture. It was a tin cup, a fixed drawer, a man who saw your pain and didn't look away, a presence that asked nothing and offered everything and waited with the patience of mountains for you to be ready. And one morning, an ordinary morning, an unremarkable morning, a Tuesday in November, when the air was cold and the coffee was hot and the telegraph key sat silent on the desk, Clara Whitmore looked at Ethan Callahan and said, "I'm ready." Ready for what? Ready to stop surviving and start living. Ethan looked at her. Those quiet eyes. That wind-burned face. The face of a man who had ridden into town for a land dispute and found something he hadn't known he was missing. "Then let's live," he said. Years later, people in Silver Creek still told the story. They told it in the general store, and at the church picnic, and around campfires on autumn nights when the wind came down from the mountains carrying the smell of pine and the promise of snow. They told the story of the Baxter family and how they fell. They told the story of the sheriff who unpinned his badge. They told the story of the doctor who wrote 2 reports, and the widow who walked through a creek in the dark, and the wife who spent 12 years building a case against her own husband. But mostly, they told the story of Clara. The woman who stood for 21 days because sitting meant pain, and pain meant remembering, and remembering meant admitting that the world had failed her. The woman who opened her telegraph office every morning and sent messages across hundreds of miles while carrying a message inside her own body that no one was willing to read. The woman who said no and was punished for it and refused to disappear. The woman who survived, and they told the story of Ethan. The mountain cowboy who walked into a telegraph office and saw what 400 people had chosen not to see. who brought a cup of coffee and fixed a drawer and spoke 5 words that cracked open a silence that had lasted 21 days. You've been hurting for a long time. Who burned alongside her, fought alongside her, stood alongside her, not in front, never in front, and waited with the patience of seasons for a woman who needed time to remember that she was worth waiting for. They told the story every year. And every year it grew the way true stories grow, not with exaggeration, but with understanding. Each telling revealed something new, a detail that had been missed, a kindness that had been overlooked, a moment of courage that only made sense in hindsight. And every year when the story was finished, someone would ask the same question: how did she do it? How did she stand for 21 days? And the answer was always the same. She stood because sitting meant giving up. And Clara Whitmore, the telegraph operator, the survivor, the woman who refused to be erased, did not give up. Not when the town looked away. Not when the powerful closed ranks. Not when the silence pressed down on her like a weight designed to crush her into nothing. She stood. And when a mountain cowboy walked through her door and saw the truth she had been carrying alone, she didn't stop standing. She stood taller, because that is what survivors do. Not because they are unbreakable, not because they feel no pain, but because somewhere inside the deepest, darkest, most battered part of their spirit, a voice whispers the same 4 words it has whispered since the beginning of time: you are not done. Clara Whitmore